Let's explore promises by looking at the Fetch API or using the Fetch API. So here's some documentation about promises, and let's actually do this. So I'm going to use the Fetch API, and I've got a couple of endpoints that I'm going to end up hitting. And what I'm going to first look at is promise chains in the sense that I've got some endpoints here, and this is a common scenario where I might want to get information about some users from an endpoint, and I'm going to do that just by hitting this endpoint. I'm going to end up fetching. Again, this ends up giving me back a promise. We could always also use async await if we wanted to, but I'm going to take the response. I'm going to turn the response to JSON, and then I'm going to get my data, and I'm just going to console log the data. So again, whether you do async await, which you'd have to put inside of a function, or use then, either one will end up working. And let's open this up. I'm going to do open index.html, and let's see if we see in the console that we've got some data back. We've got some users here. And let's actually just grab the first user. So let's first do users. Here's my array of 50 users. And I'm going to take the first user, and I'm going to get the user's ID. So now I've got the ID of the user. So the reason why I'm talking about promise chains here is that there's another endpoint that's here. So you can see for these users, you don't have any bios on these users. But if I go over here and I end up clicking on this user, I'll also end up getting the user's bio. So let's take a look and just see if we could end up doing that. So if we look at this endpoint is going to use the detail and the ID that we got back. So here we could end up doing something along the lines of we've got the ID, so we could do another fetch. And again, this is a one-liner, so this is going to end up getting returned. And once you're in a promise chain, you won't go to the next then until you satisfy that promise. So here I'm going to use the same endpoint, except I'm just going to modify it slightly. Let's take this, and we're going to use the first user. So we're going to use our Fetch API again. Let me put this in backticks. And this is going to be detail, and this is going to be the data.user0.id. Again, we could break out things a little bit, maybe make them a little bit more readable. Let's get rid of this quote over here. We've got one backtick. Let's get rid of the quote over here too. So here's our fetch call. That's going to be our promise. And let's just take a look here. So this is now going to be another fetch, and we can end up putting it then on here. We'll get another response back, and again we'll use this response to get the response.json, and we'll use another then. We'll get our data back, and let's console log this. So here's an example where we're basically using this chain to end up getting the first user in this result set. If I wanted to get a second user, I could end up doing this. And in this case, what you're seeing is that we don't know the ID until we end up making this first call. And this is where a promise chain ends up coming in pretty handy. And one thing that we might want to do here, since we are we might want to also capture some other information. This might be something that we would end up using with async await. If we wanted to do that, it's not going to look all that different. Let's comment this out. If we're using async await, the only thing we would have to do is have a function. Let's call it load data. We're going to make this asynchronous. We'll do the same thing with async await. What we're going to end up doing is we could pretty much take the same code and just destructure it a little bit differently here. So here we're going to say response equals, and we will end up awaiting this data. We'll go over here and we could say data equals response.json. And again, that's got to be an await as well, because that is also a promise. Let's comment out this stuff here. We'll bring it in a second, and we can call load data. Let's just take a look and see that we have the data. So here we've got our users, we've got our count. So here we can sort of do the same thing that we did before, but I'm going to run into a problem of these being const if I do this. I'm going to make this a let. I'm going to end up making this a let. I'm going to get rid of this line, and I'm going to use this fetch. And this is going to be my response again. Oops. I'm going to have to use an await. All right, and this is going to be, I'm going to get this now. This is going to be the details for the user. And again, I'm going to have to use my data await. And now we can console.log our data, which should just be the record for the individual user. Let's clean this up over here. The same code using a promise chain or using async await. Let's just fix this here. I think I've got an extra parenthesis. And here we end up getting the details of the user. So again, the whole idea here is that we're using a promise chain because we're getting one thing before the other.